A woman arrives at the airport expecting nothing more than a routine departure. But one man's ignorance sets off a chain of events that changes everything. What would you do if someone looked you dead in the eye and told you that you didn't belong in a world you built? Let us know in the comments section below. Melissa Sadbury didn't flinch when the guard at the gate barely glanced at her license before waving her toward the hangar. She was used to being overlooked. What mattered was where she was going, not who stood in her way. Her steps echoed softly against the polished concrete floor of Terminal 6, where the whine of distant engines sang a lullaby of power and precision. Van Nuys Airport was quiet this morning, just the way she liked it. She was running 2 minutes behind, not because she was late. Melissa was never late, but because she'd taken a moment in her car to wipe a streak of lipstick off her teeth. Presentation mattered, especially when people already didn't expect her to belong. The black tailored pantsuit she wore today hugged her just enough to whisper CEO, while the diamond studs in her ears hinted at old money she never had. Everything about her look was deliberate. Everything she had was earned. A clipboard snapped shut just ahead of her. A white man in his late 50s stood stiffly by the steps of the G4 jet. His gray captain's uniform looked freshly pressed, but the lines on his forehead creased deeper when he spotted her walking toward the aircraft. Melissa clocked the look instantly, the barely there pause in his posture, the way his mouth settled into a thin downward line. He didn't expect her. She offered a soft smile, casual but firm. Morning. I'm ready when you are. The man didn't return the smile. His eyes dropped to the Louis Vuitton duffel in her hand, then trailed to the crisp designer heels clicking across the tarmac. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, blocking the bottom of the stairs with a broad stance. This flight is reserved for a private client. I can't allow boarding without proper authorization. Melissa blinked once. She tilted her head ever so slightly. And you are? Captain Doug Harlan, he replied quickly, his shoulders squared. You'll need to step aside. The owner of this jet will be arriving shortly. Her lips twitched. Somewhere between a smirk and pure disbelief. Doug, I am the owner of this jet. He didn't move. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for a breeze to flutter the edge of her silk blouse. Doug looked her up and down again, this time slower, as if trying to reconcile her face with whatever assumptions had already formed in his head. I need to see identification. Paperwork. Something. His voice hardened. Melissa exhaled slowly, then reached into her tote and pulled out her credentials, FA registration, jet ownership documents, her company's executive ID. She held them out like a high-stakes poker hand. Doug didn't take them. Instead, he turned and reached for the walkie clipped to his chest. This is Harlan, requesting security to Hangar 6. Possible unauthorized boarding attempt. Melissa's hand froze midair, the same hand that signed 7-figure contracts. That hand, steady and precise, now trembled just slightly. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice now quiet but slicing. "I've flown out of this hangar 4 times this month. You're the new guy, and you've just insulted the person who pays for the fuel in that jet." Doug narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, step back. You're trespassing." Her breath caught. Not from fear, but from rage held like water behind a dam. Not the full kind, no. Not yet, but the slow, choking kind that black women learn to hold in boardrooms, on sidewalks, at airport terminals. She stepped back, not because he asked, but because the moment didn't deserve her fire. Not yet. Behind her, Jasmine Reeves' voice cut through the air like a blade. "You call security on her, and I promise you'll be looking for a new job by the time they arrive." Doug turned sharply. Jasmine was already walking toward them, heels clicking with urgency. Her dark red blazer screamed courtroom victory, and the iPad in her hand looked more like a weapon than a device. "Melissa?" Jasmine asked, stepping beside her. "You good?" Melissa nodded. "I was, until our pilot here decided I don't look like a jet owner." Doug's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jasmine handed over a tablet, tapping the screen. "Here's her ownership record. Digital and notarized. Here's the hangar lease. Here's the aviation company registration under Sadbury Skies LLC. Want her tax filings too, or is this where you remember how to apologize?" Doug's cheeks flushed a fast, bright red. His walkie still clutched in his hand, buzzing faint static. A slow, silent standoff stretched between them. The door to the terminal burst open. A tall man in a blue security uniform walked toward them, followed by a second officer. Doug turned toward them in relief, until the taller one spotted Melissa. "Miss Sadbury," the guard said with a nod of recognition. "Everything okay?" Doug's eyes flicked from Melissa to the guard. "You know her?" "I know her name's on every hangar lease in this row," the man replied. "And I know she's the one who flew the mayor out to D.C. last month." Doug's shoulders dropped. His mouth parted. The apology stuck somewhere between his throat and his pride. Melissa didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence did the job for her. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Not even close. The security officer didn't wait for permission. He walked past Doug, still frozen in place, and extended his hand toward Melissa. She took it. Not because she needed help, but because she understood the message it sent. Her handshake was calm, composed, not desperate, not vindictive, just undeniable. "You want us to escort him off the tarmac, Miss Sadbury?" the officer asked without blinking. She glanced toward Doug, who looked like he was only just beginning to understand the situation he had created. His mouth opened slightly, but the words that came out were a stuttered apology that tripped over itself before it could reach her ears. "No," she said softly. "Not yet." Jasmine folded her arms, her eyes locked onto Doug like a hawk watching a mouse twitch in tall grass. This wasn't just an overstep. It was a decision. A choice. You chose to ignore her documentation. You chose to escalate instead of verify. You chose to let your imagination outrank her facts. Doug looked around like he was hoping someone else might step in, might rescue him from the weight of what he'd just done. But the security team didn't move. Melissa turned to the jet. The steps were still lowered. Her jet, gleaming like a jewel under the morning sun, sat waiting, still untouched. She moved toward it. One step. Then another. Deliberate. As she placed her heel on the first stair, she paused and looked back. You still think I don't belong here, Captain? Doug swallowed hard. The tips of his ears flushed. No, I didn't know, I just. You didn't ask, she finished. That's the difference. Melissa didn't wait for him to answer. She ascended the stairs one measured step at a time until she disappeared into the cabin. Jasmine didn't follow. Not yet. She turned back to Doug. You'll be hearing from us, she said sharply. In writing. And if I were you, I'd update my resume before your phone starts ringing. Inside the jet, the cool hum of the cabin systems greeted Melissa like a sigh of relief. The leather seats were soft, untouched. There was something sacred about the quiet. Up here. This was her space. Her escape. Her reward. She sank into one of the seats near the window, looking out toward the tarmac where Doug still stood, dumbfounded, and Jasmine paced with a phone pressed to her ear. A faint smile curled the corner of Melissa's lips. This wasn't new. Not even close. It had started when she was 17. The career fair at her high school in Houston. Booth after booth of generic advice, accounting, teaching, nursing. But then she saw the aviation table. A black woman in a pilot's uniform stood behind it, grinning like she knew every secret the sky could offer. Melissa had never seen anything like it. Ever flown a plane? The woman had asked. No, Melissa had said, wide-eyed. Well, she replied, you look like someone who could own one. Those words etched themselves into Melissa's bones. But that didn't mean the world believed them too. In college, she was the only black woman in her aerodynamics elective. Not just in her year, her whole program. People thought she was in the wrong room. That maybe she was there to clean. Or to pass out flyers for a diversity club. She learned to smile through it. But not to forget. She launched her first startup at 27. A line of eco-luxury skincare born from formulas passed down by her grandmother. And reimagined for high-end retail. It wasn't overnight success. But it was fast. Fast enough that 3 years later, she was on the cover of Black Enterprise. Standing next to the very jet she now sat inside. And still. People stared at her like she was crashing someone else's party. Jasmine climbed the steps into the cabin, muttering into her phone. No, you don't need to escalate to the board yet. Yes, send me the footage now. It's under Hangar 6 today, time stamp between 8:10 and 8:20. I want every angle. No gaps. She slid her phone into her bag and sat down across from Melissa. Her chest rising with that particular kind of controlled fury. That only the most composed people ever learn to hold back. You okay? Jasmine asked finally. Melissa nodded, looking out the window again. Doug was gone. Probably escorted back to the flight office to cool off. Or maybe already being briefed by someone with far more polished words. And far less patience. I'm fine, she said. I just hate that I still have to explain myself in spaces I own. Jasmine leaned forward. You didn't explain. You corrected. Big difference. A flight attendant entered the cabin, discreet and professional. Would you like a drink before takeoff, Miss Sadbury? Melissa considered it for a second. Hot tea. Chamomile. The attendant nodded and disappeared. Do you still want to go to Napa? Jasmine asked, her voice soft now. Melissa gave a small smile. One that didn't reach her eyes. More than ever. Jasmine sat back. I'll handle the company response. We'll be ahead of this before it leaks. But if it does leak, we make sure the narrative is yours. Melissa raised an eyebrow. You think it'll get out? Jasmine shrugged. Security saw everything. Half the hangar staff saw you standing on the tarmac. With a man calling for backup like you were a threat. And the way stories move now. If someone decides to share that clip on social, it won't stay quiet. Melissa sighed. The weight of the morning pressing against her collarbone. But maybe, Jasmine added. That's not a bad thing. The tea arrived. Melissa wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth soak into her palms. You know what the sad part is, she said after a long silence. Jasmine looked up. This isn't even the worst time, Melissa whispered. It's just the most public. The two women sat in stillness for a moment. The hum of the engines pulsing beneath them. Outside the jet, a technician gave the thumbs up to the ground crew gave the signal, the plane would take off soon. But what lingered in the air wasn't just jet fuel and tension, it was a quiet, simmering promise that being underestimated never ends the way they think it will. By the time Melissa's jet touched down in Napa, her phone had already buzzed more times than she could count, messages, missed calls, mentions. Something was brewing, and it wasn't the vineyard air. Jasmine barely waited for the wheels to stop moving before switching off airplane mode and scanning her screen. She let out a low whistle. It's out. Melissa didn't need to ask what. The footage, Jasmine confirmed, already scrolling through the notifications with the same surgical precision she used in court. Someone posted it anonymously. 2 angles. Both show everything, Doug blocking you, calling security, you standing calm with your paperwork, security arriving, and then boom. Caption says, Black woman denied entry to her own jet, guess who pays his salary? Melissa pressed a hand to her temple. It's on 3 different viral pages already, Jasmine continued. One of them cropped your face out, probably didn't know who you were. But the other? They knew. They tagged Sadbury Skies, your skincare brand, and your foundation's official account. It's gaining traction, fast. Melissa sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the leather seat across from her. She hadn't spoken to anyone outside of Jasmine since the incident, not even her head of PR. She was trying to breathe, trying not to give it power. But now it had a life of its own. Comments are pouring in, Jasmine added, swiping through them. Fire him. She handled that better than I would have. It's 2025 and this still happens? And of course, the trolls. Let me guess, Melissa muttered. Maybe he didn't know. Why make it about race? And the classic, stop playing victim. Bingo, Jasmine said, eyes hard. Melissa leaned back in her seat, arms crossed. The hum of the engine had faded, but the pressure in her chest hadn't. It hadn't left since Doug stood there treating her like a criminal trespasser instead of the woman who owned the damn plane. A soft chime rang. The pilot's voice filled the cabin, we've arrived in Napa. Hangar clearance approved. You're free to disembark at your leisure. The leisure. Melissa almost laughed. There was no leisure in being a headline. A car was already waiting at the hangar, black SUV, tinted windows. The driver opened the door with a nod, not a word. Jasmine slid in first. Melissa followed, sunglasses on now, though they weren't for the sun. Jasmine's phone rang again, and this time she answered. Yes, she said sharply. She's in the car now. No, we're not doing any interviews yet. No statements. Not until we control the narrative. Of course I've spoken with PR. Yes, I'm aware CNN just picked it up. We're moving, don't worry. Melissa looked out the window as the vineyard roads blurred past, rolling hills, golden light. Everything here looked soft and beautiful, like the world didn't know how cruel it could be elsewhere. It's wild, she finally said, how fast people can turn you into a symbol. Jasmine glanced over. It's not a bad thing, Mel. You didn't ask for this, but people see you now. Melissa didn't answer. Her fingers tapped lightly against her thigh, a rhythm born from nerves she couldn't quite shake. By the time they reached the estate, her assistant Camille was already on the porch waiting, phone in hand, eyes wide. You saw? Camille asked. Melissa nodded. We've gotten over 200 interview requests. The Times, Forbes, The Shade Room, even a food blog wants to feature your wine collection because, quote, black excellence deserves a toast. I don't know whether to laugh or hide. Melissa gave a small smile, but it didn't last long. I'm not a movement, she said. I just want to live. I know, Camille said gently. But your story helps people who can't speak as loudly as you. You didn't ask for the spotlight, but it found you. Inside the estate, everything was just as she left it, wide windows, oak beams, walls filled with art and black joy. She walked slowly through the hallway to the kitchen, where the wine rep had set up her weekend tasting flight. It was supposed to be a restful weekend, quiet, rejuvenating. Not this. Jasmine followed her in, still glued to her phone. Okay. It's official. The company board just called. They want an internal review of hiring and flight policies. And they want you to issue a public response by Monday. Melissa poured herself a glass of red and took a slow sip. They want me to respond, she said. They're trying to cover themselves, Jasmine replied. You didn't do anything wrong, but they want you to speak first, to soften the heat. Melissa chuckled, sharp and bitter. Of course they do. Always the burden of the offended to comfort the offender. Jasmine didn't argue. Instead, she sat across from her at the kitchen island and set the phone down. You don't owe them comfort, she said. But you do have power now. More eyes are on you than ever. You want to shift something, change something? This is the moment. Melissa swirled her wine. She thought of every time she was asked to tone it down, to smile more, to speak less. She thought of every assistant who got mistaken for the CEO while she stood silent in meetings. She thought of Doug's face, certain, smug, and then slowly breaking under the truth. And she thought of the girl she used to be, 17, dreaming of the sky, told she could own something bigger than anyone expected. She looked at Jasmine. What if I don't just speak, she said. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Go on. What if I show them? Melissa continued, her voice low but steady. Show every young black girl what it looks like to walk through fire and not shrink. Show every suit and tie boardroom what it means when we stop asking for permission. I don't want to just clear my name. I want to clear a path. Jasmine's eyes lit up. That, she said, is a headline. Melissa took another sip, then stood. Let's get to work. Outside, the vineyard breeze rustled through the vines. The storm wasn't over, but now Melissa Sadbury was steering it, and she had no intention of flying low. 2 weeks later, Melissa stood behind a sleek white podium inside a sunlit hangar at Van Nuys Airport, the same one where she'd been denied entry to her own jet. But today, there was no security escorting her away, no questioning glances, no doubts about who belonged. The space was filled with people, reporters, business leaders, aviation students, and a front row filled with black girls in navy blue flight jackets. Students from the Fly Future initiative she'd quietly funded for the past 2 years. Now, it wasn't quiet anymore. Jasmine stood just off to the side, nodding with pride as camera shutters clicked. The press had been waiting all morning for Melissa's public statement. What they didn't know was that it wouldn't be just a statement. It would be something far louder, and far more lasting. Melissa looked out over the crowd. She spotted Camille near the back, beaming. Her eyes swept the room, steady and unwavering. Then she began. "Some people think power looks like shouting," she said, her voice smooth and certain, "or making others feel small. But real power, is quiet. It's owning the jet and still getting mistaken for the help, and walking through that moment with your dignity intact." A hush fell over the room. No phones buzzed. No one blinked. She let the silence stretch. Then 2 weeks ago, I was denied access to my own plane by someone who saw my skin before he saw my credentials. Her voice was calm, but it carried. That story traveled the world in hours. And while I wish it hadn't happened, I'm standing here today not as a victim, but as a reminder. A reminder that we still have work to do. And a reminder that we belong in every space we build, every seat we buy, and every sky we touch. The young girls in the front row sat up straighter. One of them whispered something to the girl beside her, and they both smiled. "But I didn't come here just to speak about injustice," Melissa added, eyes glittering. "I came here to create altitude." She stepped aside from the podium, revealing a large draped object behind her. With a nod to Jasmine, the cloth was pulled away, unveiling the sleek silver logo of Sadbury Aero, her newest company. An audible gasp rolled through the crowd. "I'm proud to announce the launch of Sadbury Aero," Melissa said, her voice rising. A black-owned, woman-led aviation services company built not just to challenge bias in this space, but to rewrite the rules of it. Reporters began scribbling. Cameras panned closer. "We're starting with a pilot training academy for women of color, full-ride scholarships and guaranteed apprenticeships with our partner fleets. But that's just the beginning. Our charter service launches this summer. And every single plane we operate will carry a name, not mine, but the names of the women history tried to forget. Bessie Coleman. Janet Bragg. Mae Jemison. And every girl who thought she needed permission to take off." The applause was instant, and loud. Melissa stepped back from the mic, her heart full. It was the kind of full that came from knowing your story wasn't just a sound bite. It was a catalyst. She didn't just reclaim her space, she expanded it. Backstage, Jasmine met her with a tight hug. "You really did it," Jasmine whispered. Melissa smiled. "We did it. You ready for the media swarm outside?" "As I'll ever be," she replied with a breath. "Let's give them something worth quoting." Before they stepped out, Camille jogged up, holding out her phone. "Melissa, I thought you might want to see this." She handed her the screen. It was an email. Subject, Resignation, Captain Douglas Harlem. Melissa read it once. Then again. It was short. No apology. Just a quiet step down. She handed the phone back. "Good," she said simply. "Now maybe he'll learn to look deeper next time." Outside the hangar, a small crowd had gathered, activists, supporters, young pilots. In the lane, a little girl no older than 10 clutched a notebook and stared up at Melissa with big, wondering eyes. "Are you really the boss of a jet company?" the girl asked shyly. Melissa knelt to her level. "Yep," she said with a wink. "And one day, you will be too. Deal?" The girl grinned and nodded, hard. A photographer caught the moment just as the wind picked up, tossing Melissa's curls across her cheek. She stood, took Jasmine's hand, and walked toward the press line. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Melissa sat alone on the back patio of her LA home. The Vineyard weekend had come and gone. The media cycle was still buzzing. But she'd found a few hours of peace between meetings, interviews, and business calls. Her jet sat quietly at Van New York, waiting. She'd named it the Dream Reborn. Her company, just a seed now, but with deep-rooted promise. As she sipped her wine, her phone pinged again. This time it was a message from her father, a photo. She opened it and laughed. It was a faded snapshot of her at 17, standing in front of a cardboard cutout of a plane at that old high school career fair. Her arms crossed. Her smile wide. Her ambition already carved in steel. Below the photo was his message. Told you the sky wasn't the limit. Proud of you, baby girl. Melissa looked up at the first star beginning to appear. Not the limit, she thought. Just the beginning.